This is perfect. Darth Vader.
You want me to tell you about VDR and VER? It was initially published as just VDR, right? Uh, Whenever the pilot program started, whenever CR26 was brought out, they broke it out into two different, I guess, categories. You have VDR and you have VER that are both essentially around managing your vulnerabilities and reporting your vulnerabilities, right? The real breakout is, VDR is now the vulnerability detection and response. So it's more about how the customers, or the CSPs rather, our customers, the CSPs, and including ourselves for our 20x authorization or certification. Man, I'm going to get that wrong forever. It's been an authorization for so long. It's really about identifying how these vulnerabilities across your impact your environments and the federal data across all your environments, rather than just a CVSS score that's blanketly applied, right? You have to take other considerations into effect. And what
Yeah, so it's
VER
not
does,
just it's not just it's getting away from that mindset of scan my entire inventory and just treat vulnerabilities, as they come in without any other context as to where those vulnerabilities reside, if they're internet reachable, and those kinds of things, right?
yeah, exactly. And VER, goes into, the vulnerability evaluation and reporting. So it puts standards in place for how they're supposed to report it, what metrics they use to determine how, what that pain number is, right? What was just an N number, now it's the pain number, and
I love
I,
recursive
I
algorithms.
I thought it was, yeah, I thought it was funny when they started calling it the pain. When it was just the N number, we kind of joked about it a little bit, but this is I really think it is funny because it's the potential agency impact rating. So it's really about how this vulnerability is going to impact the agencies, and it gives them a pretty clear view.
Yeah, exactly. And it forces a program to do actual risk evaluation and risk treatment, right? Instead of just a blanket policy about all lows must be resolved in a certain time frame, all moderates. It forces you to know more context about the environment, and in a lot of ways you can. There's a lot that you can do, within the CSP. CSP can make decisions about you know how to score things. Yeah,
Yeah, and they really want to make it automatable, right? So it's like, how can you translate this to a one or a zero? Like, is there a known exploit available for this? Okay. Well, if there is a known exploit, is it even a public thing that is reachable from the public internet, or do you have to have privileged access to do it? So there are a lot of kind of ones and zeros that CSPs are able to apply to this to programmatically adjust the risk score, right?
right. Yeah, so I mean, really, like let's talk through VDR a little bit,
Hmm.
separate of what they separated out of in VER, right? So vulnerability detection is the same, pretty much the same process that most CSPs have been doing all along, right? They have to do continuous scanning, but one thing that's really interesting about the way this is playing out and the way that the rules in VER require you to do things is you're going to have to scan much more frequently. So those that have a scanner that does like a one shot scan of the infrastructure, they're going to have to do those scans much more frequently. And really, I think most customers, most CSPs would be better off if they have a scanner that's real time.
Yeah, you're spot on with that, Jason. They're really moving away from the monthly scan cadence, right? This is a snapshot, one time a month that you're going to give a readout, and it really is more of a continuous monitoring model, right? Because to your point, if you're just doing a one and done scan, okay, that's great. What happened in between? You're really going to want that kind
Hmm.
of a continuous type of a scanner to be bringing those vulnerabilities in on a regular cadence, and then running your analysis against that, programmatically, as we already discussed. What does this impact, or this vulnerability? How does it really impact my environment?
Right. Yeah, and similarly, you've got to be bringing in threat intelligence,
Hmm.
and other data sources on a continuous basis, right? And sort of correlating all that information together.
Yeah.
So the era of the, you know, twice a month scanning is is waning based on this, right? Because not only, some of these timelines that are in VER, it's hard to talk about these two things independently,
It
because
is.
there is so much tie-in. But the time frames could be very, very short, depending on the pain rating. So you don't have that, that month to watch a finding fall off anymore.
Right. And I mean, it's really going to impact the entire CI/CD pipeline for a lot of CSPs, right? Because to your point, some of those timelines, you have like a half a day if it's like a pain one for like a class D, not necessarily to remediate the vulnerability completely, but at least to get the pain level to a less severe level, right?
Right.
I mean, you do have a certain timeline you have to completely eradicate it from your system, but some of these timelines are like a half a day, and really aggressive and really force you to be active in these environments daily, and in order to make sure your threat posture, especially for the federal data, they're really focused on the federal data, um, and how it impacts those agency customers, making sure that is secure. So,
Right. And then,
um,
the vulnerability response requirement is all about tracking, monitoring, mitigating, remediating, determine if there's been exploit attempts,
mhm.
and that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things, and I don't know if we spoke about this yet, Jason. I kind of want to go back. Like, why is this important for CSPs right now? Why are we even talking about this? Yeah, FedRAMP just dropped it. But one of the things I think that's worth pointing out is initially FedRAMP was going to track implementing VDR and VER essentially the middle of next year, like by June 1st of 27 is when they were initially targeting deploying this, when they were putting CR26 together. Then there was a binding operational directive that came out, right? um, you know, and essentially binding operational directive 2604 came out, and it forced them to accelerate their timelines and basically implementing this for all the FedRAMP Rev 5 CSPs that are on the marketplace. And I think that's an important call out because they understand the impact this is going to have on a lot of customers. Like, are they going to have to bring in more, different tooling that's going to be able to do some of of these functions and serve up these JSON schemas that have required reporting formats to the agencies,
Right. Yeah. And, yeah, I mean, the larger programs that have been in place for a long time that have that scanning cadence and things like that. I mean, I think that they're going to certainly take time, especially within the agencies. It's going to take time. It makes me wonder if they could get that done by December. I know, cloud providers have more engineering resources that they could put to it. But again, like you raised the point that you got to be able to respond quickly to
hmm
some of these things, especially where the pain, numbers dictate it. And if your CI/CD process, if it lags too long, or if it takes too long to get a deployment together, in a lot of cases, you're going to be missing some of these targets. Now, the good news is there's opportunities to do other mitigations, to make it less painful.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about VDR, it is it's not just CVE scanning, right? It's other things like failures in the processes
Hmm.
themselves. So if if you have problems with getting things resolved on time, things like that, those themselves should be reported as vulnerabilities in your system, right?
Right, like
So it's
threat
kind of like the
intelligence
manual
feeds.
POAMs used to be. Is the I think the idea here.
Yeah, they're really moving away from the POAMs. I'm not certain how fast, and I think you already spoke about this. I'm not certain how fast agencies are going to be able to adopt moving away from the POAMs because I believe a lot of their internal processes are built around this structure that has been here for years. So I do think there's going to be kind of a transition period. However, you're still going to have to do this thing by December the 7th. All these
Right.
CSPs are going to have to be able to do this and report this up to FedRAMP and the agencies, at least serve it up so the agencies can grab it um, at that point. I don't believe, from my reading of this, and you can keep me honest on it, I don't believe it's going to be getting rid of POAMs or normal Rev 5 reporting immediately. I know there is a path to getting rid of that, but at least for the immediate future, I see them as kind of parallel reporting requirements, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean the way that I've seen it, Mike, is I think that they're taking the output of VDR, right, the continuous reporting that we're doing for VDR, and that those become the inputs for the agency's POAM, right? The POAM is no longer a thing that applies to the cloud provider. It's more of the VDR reporting and the vulnerabilities in real time become the inputs to the agency's POAM. Is the idea like yeah? I mean, I think that that's the concept here.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. It's that real time reporting. It enables those federal agencies to have more insight and really understand their threat posture from these external CSPs that they're leveraging, right? How they're going to ingest it, I know there's a date these agencies have to meet where they're going to figure out how they're going to ingest these findings,
Right.
which is August the 7th. The agencies must be able to support this ongoing vulnerable remediation. And, you know, I don't know about you, but I've seen the way and kind of the resource constraints that some of these agencies have in trying to implement this. And I think that's going to be challenging for some of these agencies. I mean, that is less than a month away
Yeah.
at the time of this recording, right? 3 weeks.
Yep. It's not much time at all.
No.
Um. All right. Let's talk about VER a little bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is the new kid, right? The kind of the breakout.
Hmm.
And really, this is the new stuff, right? This is where it's you can't just take a vulnerability as it's defined in CVE and treat it based on that and nothing else, right? You have
Right.
to add context. So part of that context is exploitability in your environment, right? And that has to do somewhat with if it's internet reachable, and things like that. And those things combined, there's math around all this, but it turns becomes the pain score. But yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on that and challenges around that?
Well, I mean, some of the challenges around that is, especially for these large scale environments, how do you access and exploit these vulnerabilities? Typically engineering teams, whenever we're doing deviation requests in the past, right, you have to really dig into, what resource is this? You know, looking at the vulnerability itself, can they actually do anything with this vulnerability? Like, is it a front end vulnerability that an end user can do, or do you have to log in to, is it some kind of a kernel vulnerability, right? That somebody has to have a higher privilege to be able to exploit. So even just because a machine is internet reachable does that mean it's real that someone from the public internet can do that privilege escalation to exploit this vulnerability, right? So I think I kind of made it sound simple, well, one or a zero. Is it publicly reachable? Is it not? Typically we've treated it as, yep, it's publicly reachable. We're just going to assume that this can be exploited on the public internet. However, I really think if it's going to force CSPs, I guess from my perspective, even into using AI more to analyze these vulnerabilities to better understand what does it really mean for my system, not just a blanket anyone running on this operating system or running this type of are they using Angular or Java or whatever on the front end.
Hmm.
It's more specific to that CSP.
Right. And to me, I think this is going to be one of the hardest things to implement.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, for most CSPs, especially when you get above a certain size, right? The team that's doing vulnerability scanning is typically not the team that's doing the engineering side of things, right?
Exactly.
So the security teams that are doing the scanning and analysis, they, usually a lot of times they don't have the context. They've got a big inventory list, and they don't know what each one of these instances or endpoints are actually doing, or how how they tie into the fundamental architecture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a real need there to I think from the engineering side, right, from a systems engineering standpoint, to tag resources in ways that have some of those architecture characteristics that follow, right? So part of that might be the reachability piece, and it's really important here to understand that reachability doesn't mean that you have a public IP or a private IP, right? That's not the way that FedRAMP wants you to determine this.
Right.
Let's say that you're hitting like an in-tier kind of environment, right, where you've got a front end, a back end, and then a database. If you can do actions on the front end that result in database queries that go to the database in the back end, then the database is likely considered internet reachable.
Right.
There's things that you can do in different layers to potentially mitigate vulnerabilities that could be exploited. There's firewalling and WAF and things like that could be done. But it's important to realize that even though those things are in place, they can often be bypassed. I've even seen plenty of vulnerabilities that come out, and there's a few attack patterns or paths, and they don't realize that there's even more patterns that apply, and those come out later. So they patch it one way, but there's other patterns that could be used to get to those things.
No, I
So I
mean
think,
you're
yeah,
spot on.
and,
You're absolutely spot on.
and scanners can't really do this. This has
Mm-mm.
to be part of the engineering discipline that you're using internally to be able to do these things. It's something that our platform builds already build this kind of stuff in,
Mm-hmm.
so that we know based on tagging of resources and things like that. We have that context to be able to do this kind of analysis in our command center when we're analyzing vulnerabilities. But a lot of CSPs aren't going to have a good solution for this, and I think they're going to struggle with it. I think in a lot of cases they may have to consider big areas internet reachable because they might not know if they are or not.
Well, and it's also to your point. It's like the big areas are internet reachable because if this is exported on the front end, what all can it influence in the back end? I mean, use a database as an example, but I'm sure there's other aspects of especially these large complex uh, infrastructures and architectures that can influence more than just a database, right? And where all does it sprawl? And it's really going to, I mean, we've historically done that data flow diagram for CSPs, But it's really going to force, even looking beyond the data flow diagram, into, and you even called this out, like access control policies, like network access controls, like SCPs, things like that, in order to that defense in depth approach. Like what can a CSP do if you have this high pain level vulnerability that needs to be remediated in half a day? What can you do immediately to bring that pain level down and at least reduce the risk while your engineers can work through their sprint in order to pull a patch? Because you don't want engineers to just default to logging in to the back end of the system and just kind of hot fixing live in a system, right? You still need to follow good engineering practices to remediate these things. So I think there's going to be a balance that's going to have to be struck here, if that makes sense, Jason.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And and that's where AI is helpful at doing some of this analysis and doing you know doing this in a manner that's as fast as the data comes in, right? The data comes in real time. The analysis could be done. You can get your likely exploited score and kind of be able to determine next steps pretty quickly. Like, here's the pain level that we're seeing, right, based on all the contextual factors. And then then you look at okay, how much time will it take to remediate, and can we do it within that particular window?
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the way I'm looking at it, and this kind of was a thought I had recently while I was researching this, Vader and VER, is it's really moving towards the same type of methodology, at least from my lens, from a reporting perspective, as we currently do with security threats, like through a SIEM tool, right? It's almost turning vulnerability management into like SIEM level or SIEM like alerting, and how you're going to react to it, and it's going to force CSPs and even agencies to be able to ingest those types of alerts to understand what they need to do to react to it and how it impacts their system, much the way we've been doing for years, from a SOC perspective, if that makes sense,
Yep.
So,
Talk about the time frames, based on some of the calculations.
so they've really broken down the pain level remediations depending on what your certification level is, right? So if you're a Class C, your pain level remediation time frames are different than if you're a Class D, which is
The
basically the difference
rules.
between a moderate and a high, right? So, yeah. So essentially, if you're, that upper left-hand corner, I kind of break it out into a box, right, where the pain level goes up on one side, and then the likelihood of the impact goes out across the bottom. Kind of that upper that upper left-hand corner, pain 5, a high likelihood of exploit in the environment. It's an internet reachable vulnerability. If you're a Class D CSP, you have 12 hours to remediate that to at least a lower pain level. So, as I was speaking about earlier, you have a half a day from the time that's identified. If you're continuously scanning, and say Inspector picks it up at 10 o'clock at night, that gives you till 10 o'clock the next morning to remediate this thing. And, most people, at least in the U.S., because they, require U.S. SIT-SOIL report, are, they're embedded this time. So really it's going to require that SOC level type of incident response from my perspective on that level of alert and that tier alert. That same pain 5, high likelihood for a Class C, or formerly called moderate, you have 2 days to remediate that. That's still pretty aggressive. It's not quite as aggressive as a Class D, but at least it gives you a little bit more time. But if it happens, I'm going to go back to worst case scenario, happens at 8 o'clock on a Friday evening, most people are off Saturday and Sunday in the U.S. that are doing this continuous monitoring and vulnerability management. They're not even going to see it until Monday morning, and by then you're already late, right? So it goes back to that kind of SOC level monitoring for these vulnerabilities. And then it goes all the way down to kind of the other extreme, where I spoke about the upper left-hand corner. If you follow out to the, and kind of the lowest pain level, which on this chart it's a pain 2 a level, and it's non-internet reachable. It's no likelihood of exploit, essentially. Then they give you 192 days to remediate that. So it's quite the gamut, right? And it's not to say that the CVS scores are not considered in this metric, because it is, from a high, moderate, and low perspective. Going back to what is now going to be referred to as the old way. But there's just this extra analysis that has to go on these vulnerabilities to either automatically raise or lower these vulnerabilities. And then there's, I say 192 days. That was for the Class C. It is 192 days also for the Class D. So the highs and moderates of yesterday are the same for that pain 2 non-likelihood of exploit. So. And that's kind of another thing that's been a change in, I want to say, nomenclature for this release, right? And they kind of pivoted to this when they initially released it for a pilot program to test VDR. Was instead of saying known exploit available, it's the likelihood of exploit available. So it's really pivoting. Okay, yeah, it's a known exploit on this particular configuration on this particular system, but what's the likelihood of that exploit on your system? So you have to treat it as a KEV or a high likelihood unless you can prove otherwise.
Right.
To your point. So
Yeah, and this is going to be really helpful, I think. You know, think about some of the scan findings that we've had before, Mike, where it's reported, by Tenable, but the actual vendor comes back and says this is a false positive. It's just not accurate, right?
mm-hmm.
We can account for those now pretty easily without having to jump through a lot of hoops. Because a lot of times the vendors they can determine whether or not that vulnerability is real, or if it's a backported fix or something like that. And it's just false positives kind of take care of themselves under this new way of doing things. So that you don't have to jump through a lot of hoops to have evidence and deviate like bunches of vulnerabilities. So it's really going to help with that, I think.
Yeah, 100. I 100% agree. I also believe that that this is a move in the right direction. Like I think a lot of times when I'd be working with CSPs that have a really good security posture, they're like, "What do you mean I only have to scan once a month and report on it once a month? What about all this time in the middle?" I really do think this is a good move in the right direction for security of our federal agencies that are using these products, right? I'm
Well,
really looking forward to seeing that.
You won't have to spend so much time on the machinations that we did before of things that
Yeah.
really aren't important, but now we've got to deviate everything and we got to come up with good justifications that everyone agrees with.
Mm-hmm.
They're sort of taking that off the table, and it's like put that energy into the things that matter.
Yep, exactly.
And then they're tightening up the constraints on the things that are really important, right? So like 2 days is the worst case scenario in this new system, right? But that shouldn't happen that often, right? That's for like
Right.
that's for like a log4shell or something like that or Heartbleed. kind of these bigger things that became, full blown incidents. So
Yeah, you're spot on, right?
yeah,
And typically for those Log4j type of like vulnerability incidents, I mean, I remember when that went down, and entire security and engineering teams. I mean, that was right around Christmas time, about 4 or 5 years ago at this point, and everyone was spun up all weekend working to remediate that because it had such an impact. So, you're spot on. So if something falls in that pane five, high likelihood where they have 12 hours, it's not going to, it shouldn't be a surprise. Like this should be something that not just one CSP is dealing with, that everyone is dealing with, that's been flushed out, that fired real time, almost treat it like an instant response in order to at least reduce the risk and get it to that lower pain number, and network isolate the machine. I mean, I'm using terminology that we're used to using in a SOC in order to get those things remediated.
yeah. I mean, yeah, and this is all about transparency over
Hmm.
checking the box as well, right?
Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. The other thing that just follows the whole 20x philosophy is kind of this overall feeling of, FedRAMP is going to provide you with some flexibility here, right? But you're
Hmm.
still going to be held accountable for how you use that flexibility. So, they're not going to kind of be up in your knickers about, how you evaluate these things. But let's say that you're magically, like, every vulnerability that comes in is not likely exploitable, right?
Exactly.
Like that's probably not going to end well for you, especially if there's an incident and something happens, and they look back and you've been categorizing all your vulns as not likely exploitable.
Everything's
Yeah,
192 days, Jason. You know that.
yeah, yeah,
Nothing can impact my system. I'm totally secure.
yeah.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I do anticipate 3PAOs when they audit this to review how you're scoring this, right? I don't know that I haven't dug in too much to the 3PAO guidance on this, but I'm sure they're going to have to review how CSPs are determining that pain level whenever whenever the next annual audit is.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to the there's actually a requirement. Yeah, it's failures are vulnerabilities. So VDR, CSO, FAV.
Hmm.
If there's problems or issues with your process, right, those themselves are vulnerabilities and need to be tracked.
Hmm.
So I'm assuming, and I don't see this here, but I'm assuming that 3POs are going to be looking at that and could flag those kind of things.
Absolutely, I would think any reputable 3PO would have to be doing that going forward, right? Um,
But
Especially in
it's
this
better if you
space.
flag it first.
Absolutely, if you can flag it
As
and
a
be like, this is
CSO.
what.
Yeah.
And one of the other things I want to call out is, if you haven't already struck up a conversation, if you're a CSP and the FedRAMP Rev 5 space and you have not already struck up a conversation with your agency sponsor on this, you probably should be doing that. What are their plans for ingesting VDR, VER? Like I said, I don't anticipate POAMs and inventory and deviation sheets going away just yet from an agency perspective. I think they have a lot of processes in place for that. However, again, I mean, they're going to be required to be ingesting this. It's a binding operational directive that they have to be able to ingest these vulnerabilities this way. So that this isn't just from FedRAMP. This is from yeah, this is from a little higher. This is from CISA, right? So and I guess I just wanted to call out, and as we're starting to wrap this up, what would it look like to be successful for a CSP to be successful in this space, right? And I really think it comes down to can they answer 6 questions, right? Do they know what vulnerabilities exist right now in their system? Do they know which of those vulnerabilities matter the most? Do they know which federal customers are affected by those vulnerabilities? Some, are they servicing both DoD and FedCiv? Are they able to break that up? What is the mitigation status? Like, are they going to be able to meet these timelines, especially if you get up into those higher pain levels and a high likelihood of exploit? How quickly are they reducing the risk? And what information are they able to share automatically with those federal agencies? So, those are kind of the 6 questions that if they have answers to all those, I think they could be considered being successful with VDR and VER.
Yep. All right.
Well, thanks for chatting
Okay,
with me
bye.
today, Jason, on Vader.
You're welcome, Mike. Could you not have
And
next time come into the office? It's much funner in the office.
I know it is much more fun in the office. And I'm going to tell you, oh, here it comes.
What was that? Is that people being slain?
Nice.
It's a YouTube video. Sorry.
We'll leave everyone with the Vader. Love it. Awesome.